looks like a retired defensive nose tackle. That looked like he'd been down there in the pit.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, big old guy.
Jay was just saying, hey, look, I made some bad reads last week. I got to do better.
Yeah, but he was kind of laughing.
Yeah.
And saying, yeah, we'll get him. They're down.
Broncos on a blitz. Somebody might come clean. It was Monk. Pass it high over his head. Dennis Smith.
But again,
and by the time I get finished with that, somebody don't really think about this plan, but he probably should have been. I'd like to tell this in 3 parts. Being a doctor, I still think that to give some idea of the medical background, so you know what I was faced with is important. Then I'll tell you what I experienced from a subjective point of view. And then the third section, to throw it open to any questions. In 1943, just having met a wonderful young couple here from the University of Richmond, I was out at the University of Richmond. This had gone up there in 41. A fellow by the name of Hitler came along and changed my schedule. So I was rushing up and took 3.5 years of college in 2 years, because my father, of all things, who was too old to be drafted, was called into service, being charged of the storage of fuel for the D-Day invasion. And then when I heard he definitely was going overseas, I volunteered from inactive reserve to active duty. And as I've often laughed and said, since it's the only place on earth I've ever found where I can march the money up to my knees and still have dust going in my face when I'm talking about the panhandle of Texas. With all due respect to Texas here. I had completed basic, or just about completed basic. One day got called up to appear before the commander of the company, told to go back and get in dress uniform. I was going to have to go to battalion headquarters. Young people I began to have some very serious misgivings. It isn't very often that a private is told to get in dress uniform to go to the battalion headquarters unless there's a court-martial. When I got there, my worst fears were confirmed. I had never seen as much brass in one place since I had come into the Army. Told to have a seat. They called for me in a few minutes. Then they told me I could go on in. When I went in there, here was a 2-star general, the most I had seen, sitting there at the desk, and I snapped to attention. In fact, I think I had the most rigid attention you've ever seen. Finally said at ease. And then began to throw all kinds of questions, I think, about everything that's ever happened to me, and then told me that I was to report back the next afternoon at 2 o'clock. I still couldn't find out exactly what was going on. At least I got the impression I wasn't being court-martialed. Or if I was, it was going to be a doozy because this was going to be a general. They didn't have that high a brass on a special summons. Went back and was told that I had been picked of all things by the Army Specialized Training Program to be sent back to study medicine, and I was being assigned to the Medical College of Virginia. And if you ever heard of a young man thinking he had to worry about the tail, I thought I had. My medical education was going to be paid for by Uncle Sam. I was going to be billeted at my own home, all expense paid, and I was going to be a full-fledged MD by the time I was 23 years of age. I really thought that I had to worry about the tail. Like most young people, I think this happens too. By the time I was 30, I was going to have 2 cats in the garage, and I'm not talking about the feline variety. Going to have a cottage at the beach. I wanted to help my fellow human beings, but I had some very definite goals. Now, as Bob Burns at Great Scottish Sports said, man proposes and God disposes. I don't think I can blame this on God, though. About 3 weeks later, a young save-tail lieutenant sent my entire battalion, which I was, at detention at 5 above 0. And he put 90% of my battalion into the hospital with what was known as an upper respiratory infection. I was about to have a fit because I knew that I had to start medicine. It was going to be sometime just before Christmas. This was right after Thanksgiving. A week later, I really felt miserable. Went over to the dispensary to find out what was wrong. They took my temperature, sent me to the hospital. I was in the hospital for a week, and if ever you ever heard of a private trying to press a bunch of doctors and nurses into decisions, I was in. Finally talked them into sending me to the recuperation ward on the morning of the 19th of December, because by that time I'd seen the orders. I was due to report to the commandant at the medical college in Virginia on the 22nd of December at 2:30 in the afternoon. This was a recuperation ward. I've really never met such wonderful people. They made arrangements for the Jeep to pick me up the next morning at approximately 1 o'clock. I was aboard the train at 2:20 a.m. there in Abilene, and then on into Richmond. Never will forget, that evening, a buddy I had met there in recuperation ward asked me if I would be interested in going to see the show with him in the hospital. Now this was 1943, were the great big station hospitals. To give you some idea, that particular night, I would say conservatively, there were over 5,000 patients in the hospital. You can't put 5,000 patients in the University of Virginia, the Medical College of Virginia, and Norfolk all combined. So you have some idea of one of them. That day and time, these old hospitals were spread out. So we went to see the show, which had a theater right in the hospital itself. I told them we could go if I could get back early, because I knew I had to be picked up by the Jeep at about 1 o'clock or 5 after 1. So we went to the 7 o'clock show. I came back, and I felt pretty hot. I had completed my basic training, was also certified as a medical and surgical tech. And I knew that the best way to reduce temperature was to take aspirin and what we call ABCs. So I went in and asked the ward boy for 6 aspirin tablets and 3 ABCs, two aspirin, ABC, found in the bed, and went to sleep. About 12 o'clock, I awakened and I was burning up. Climbed back into the bed and went back to sleep. I said 1 o'clock, it was 3 o'clock. The Jeep was going to get me up. About 2 o'clock, I awakened again and I was on fire. Took my last 2 aspirin and ABC and tried to go back to sleep and couldn't. And I said, one reason I couldn't go back to sleep because I was coughing up so much material and spitting in the sputum cup. Now, I was in a ward where you have 12 beds on one side, 12 on the other, and did not want to turn on the light until it was time to go, because the nurse had lent me her alarm clock to go off. So then I was sitting there sweating, could I get on the train? Somehow or another I had the idea if I could get on the train, that they wouldn't throw me off, and if the train went to Richmond, if I ever got to Richmond, I could get into the medical college, and if I collapsed in front of the medical college, they wouldn't kick me out of that. You can see my thinking was getting a little thinky. So, things were just getting steadily worse. So finally, in desperation, to see what time it was, I turned on the light, and sure enough, it was about 10 minutes before the alarm went to go off. And I looked down into the sputum cup to see why I'd been coughing up so much material and got the shock of my light. That sputum cup was full of white blood. That really scared me to death. Pardon my play, I didn't know. So, I went in and asked the ward boy for a thermometer, took my own temperature, and when I took it out of my mouth, I don't know which one of us were in the greatest state of shock, he or myself. The temperature actually registered 106.5. Went in the system telling him not to squeal on me, because before I could say anything, he went out. The nurse wasn't in the ward right at the time to get the nurse. She came back in, got another thermometer, shook it down, put it in my mouth. She took it out about minutes later. She didn't say anything at all. She just told the ward boy to get the medical officer in charge. He came, never even bothered taking my temperature again, put a stethoscope on my chest, said, call the ambulance immediately. We're sending him over to the X-ray section. And I thought to myself, what's wrong with this guy? He doesn't know it, but I've got to be on the train here. And 25 minutes, he's talking about sending me to X-ray. You know, we have a name for this, psychiatry. Just like you heard yourself here talking about massive denial. We call it projection. It was like when I pointed to him and said, now the trouble with him is, and you know, I have 3 fingers pointing back at me. But at that day of time, I wasn't a psychiatrist. So, the last thing I remember from a human point of view was the captain in X-ray, the doctor there, thing that I think I could stand up long enough on to get a picture of my chest, and I really thought the sky there was trees. Remember hearing that machine make that peculiar little whirl and then a click, and that's the last thing I remember, and I'm told that I collapsed in a heap at the base of that machine. Now, young people, when this thing happened, I was 6'2". I weighed 178 pounds. Weighed slightly a bit more than that, as you can see from all this professional dignity. But I really didn't have any fat. I'd been a long-distance runner in college, had just finished basic, and I was pretty much approximately 2 weeks later, when they put me on the scale, because they told me that when my weight got up to 135 pounds, that they had saved my seat for me at the medical college, and when my weight got to 135 pounds, they put me on the train and sent me to Richmond. Now, I don't remember, because one of the hardest things I ever had to do was stand up on the scale at this time. But as near as I recall, my weight was something under 100 pounds. So you can begin to understand how totally devastating this thing was. Now, what happened from the rest of the medical history is this. Apparently, my condition steadily deteriorated until about 24 hours later, when a ward boy making his rounds and to give him medication came in, he could get no pulse, no respiration, no blood pressure. He did the same thing I would. He went and called what we call the OB, the medical officer in charge of the ward at night. He came, and I'm told after complete examination, told the ward boy I had expired for more. Now, fortunately, the ward boy decided to finish his medical rounds before he decided to get me prepped. He came back apparently to really get me ready for the ball, and he claims he saw something move. So he goes and gets this medical officer again. Now, this I know nothing about, or this I've been told secondhand. The medical officer comes back the second time and tells him, no, he did not see anything move, and I'm just as dead this time as I was the first time. Because again, he did check me completely out. Now, to me, one of the most amazing things, speaking as a physician myself, is that a little Army ward boys talk to captain into giving a shot of adrenaline directly into the heart. Y'all wouldn't necessarily know this, but in case my heart is suddenly stopped and shot, lost blood that could be replaced, because this was before the day of either closed or open cardiac massage, that would have been the treatment's choice. But I later was to find out that the diagnosis was double lobar pneumonia. Now, it's hard for you all possibly to realize this today because you live in the day of antibiotics. But even as late as 1945, at the end of World War II, 1 out of every 2 people who entered the Medical College of Virginia with lobar pneumonia died from it. It was a great killer. It's still your great killer of old age. But with antibiotics today, we certainly in use are not worried with it anymore. Now, I tell you that from a subjective point of view. I mean, from a physical point of view. From a subjective point of view, this is what I experienced. I awakened when I found myself in this little room. I had never been in this room before. I'm looking around the room trying to find my uniform because I realized that I had missed my train. Now, let me tell you this sounds peculiar to you, but it's not quite as peculiar as it sounds. How many of you have ever set your clock to get up and go hunting or fishing and found yourself wake up just before the alarm clock went off? Many of you have ever been mothers, and I don't think y'all do it anymore, but when I used to be a family physician, we had the mothers feed the babies every 4 hours whether they were hungry or not. I think it was part of a sadistic trend in medicine. And many a time I've seen my wife wake up just before the alarm clock went off, whether the baby alarm clock went off or not. Because we do. We have a built-in time system in us that is accurate down to well within a second. And I knew intuitively I had missed my train. Now, let me kind of give you a picture of what this room looked like. If you went from the door out to where this room was here sitting and back over to about here and then back here, imagine a white hospital bed here, a white bedside table here, a lamp right here with a 15-watt light bulb, a big lamp which you turned off, That day time, they didn't have the screens like we have now at hospitals where you can pull around the ceiling. What they pulled those screens, they want the screen in front of the bed, it was on an iron frame, kind of a white sheet on the iron frame, they pulled it around the front. Over here was a door going to a connecting bath. Right here was a white metal shaft. That was the only thing you know. And I'm looking for my uniform because I think I've got to get to medical school right quick. Couldn't find it. I decided, well, I didn't have time enough to remain in that place. I was going to leave there anyway. So I come on out of the room, go into the ward, because this was a room apparently set between another room like it here and another room here. Across from me was the nurse's office, over here was the ward boy office, and the storage room over here on this side was the doctor's office. Back here were double doors going to a ward that had 12 beds on each side. Here double doors going out into a connecting ramp that connected all these wards together. So I go on through the doors going up to the connecting corridor, and I saw this ward boy coming down with a covered up tray. Now, whether that was medical instruments, food, what, I don't know. But I turned around to tell him to watch where he was going because he was going to walk into me. And either he went through me or I through him. Now, you would have thought that this would have gotten over the very thing you heard Kubler Ross talk about massive now. At that age, when I got my mind made up I was going to do something, I was going to do it. So there's the door right across the corridor going that door, so I go through that door. I'm no sooner through that door than boom. I'm about 500 feet to 500 yards above the ground, traveling at the most incredible rate of speed you've ever seen in your life. See the topography gradually changing from the mesquite trees and the little sand dunes there in the panhandle of Texas until where it's getting more and more like I was accustomed to. Past many small rivers, finally past this large river. Saw this white all-night cafe on the corner. Decided I light down because I saw this lone civilian walking down the street getting ready to go into this cafe to see if he could tell me how to get, whether I was on the right road to get to Richmond. Man, you got to admit I'm either out of my tree or this is too fantastic to be a story. Go up there to ask him what town this is, which way to get to Richmond. And this character acted like he could neither hear me nor see me. So I thought, well, I'll just tap him lightly on the side of his cheek. There's something wrong with him. See if I can get his attention. I go to tap him lightly on the side of his cheek, and my hand goes through him. Now, that told me something was disgustingly wrong. I had never had that happen before. This is the second time this thing had happened. So I go over and lean up against the guy wire of the telephone pole to kind of think this thing over. And my hand goes through the guy wire of the telephone pole. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had left something back in that room, in the bed. I didn't want to think what it was I possibly had left back there. But whatever that thing was, because I was still using massive denial, it has apparently changed my appearance so neither the ward boy nor this guy could see me. And the next question that hit me, well, what would be the point of going on to Richmond, even if I was going in the right direction? Because the ward boy hadn't seen me, this man hadn't seen me. Would the commandant be able to see me? Would my family be able to see me when I got there? And I was rapidly coming to the conclusion, for some very strange reason, no. Now let me stop at this stage and say this. Approximately, I guess about, because this was December, probably the night of the early morning of December the 20th of 1943. In October of 1944, because I conditioned out of medical school, I and 4 of the medical students were reassigned back to Abilene, Texas, in Brooklyn, Texas. We got a week's delay in travel. We wanted to go by and see New Orleans. First night we spent in Cincinnati, Ohio, coming from Richmond to Cincinnati. Second night we decided we were going to spend in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Third night, fourth night, and fifth night in New Orleans. Then on over to Dallas, spend the night there. Then to Fort Worth, and we're home in Abilene, Texas. We pulled into Vicksburg after dark. This was in wintertime, October. There in this motel, got up early the next morning because we were trying to get down to New Orleans as quick as we could. None of us had seen it. We'd all heard about it as much about New Orleans, I guess, as any of there. And we were driving down this street, and we had to turn up to get even with the bridge, because if you've ever been in Vicksburg, you go across over to Louisiana, but it's very high over on the Vicksburg side. And I said to the medical student driving, I said, would you mind going down 1 block further? He said, why? Now this time I had, for many reasons, already learned not to tell anybody about this experience I had, because everybody kept looking at me like I was a bit daft. I said, don't ask me why, I just want to see if there's a white all-night cafe on the corner. We went 1 block farther, and there was the same white all-night cafe I'm telling you about right now. I had never been in Vicksburg in human form before. So this takes, you see this out of any possibility of being an illusion, a hallucination, or a dream. Now, I suddenly was to make a great discovery, because by this time I'm getting a little bit frantic. Somehow I intuitively knew I had better go back, and I'm coming now back to the experience I was telling you, to Camp Hartley Station Hospital. And my massive denial was breaking down. I began to realize I had left the body in that bed. I couldn't truly account for it because I had a spiritual body, a spiritual being. And I had no trouble getting there. Now that's very definitely incredulous, I'm sure, for you to understand what I'm saying, but I want to say something to you. William James was absolutely right when he talked about this type of experience being totally inapplicable. I'm having to use a language that there is no language to actually describe what I experienced. So the only thing I can do is try to translate into words that you can get some concept of. And I'm sure there's a gap. But time and space that you and I comprehended in this dimension does not exist once you get out of this dimension. And no trouble at all getting back there because of time. In our spiritual form, we have a homing device more correct than any physical. If you look at your map and look at Abilene, Texas, Richmond, Virginia, and Vicksburg, Mississippi, you'll find out just about on a straighter course that you could have possibly been on. There's a crow flies, I got it. But you see, when I left that room, I hadn't looked to see what room it was. I hadn't looked to see which ward it was. And when I got back there to the station hospital, I started on the strangest search you can imagine. And I'm sure that most of you young people have heard about an identity crisis. Well, I've got a new definition of identity crisis. You think you know what you look like? Forget it. You've never seen yourself except in the two-dimensional object known as a mirror from here up. You can go over here to Mineral Roads and maybe look there where you've got your glass in three directions where you can get some idea of size. But just out of curiosity, how many of you ever heard yourself for the first time on a tape recorder or saw yourself on television were a little shocked at what you look like? You have some idea what I was faced with. Now I'm going from ward to ward, room to room. I can see the soldiers lying there in the bed. I can see the nurses. I can see the doctors. The only trouble is, in the United States Army in that day and time, all of us wore the same type of GI haircut. We were all under the same brown army blankets. And it's amazing how much you look like somebody else. That time I had a 5-gram fraternity ring with the University of Richmond insignia on the side. 1945, the year I was due to graduate, I've been on the schedule. And I'm going through trying to find these bodies lying in the bed that have this ring on. I see several people that look like me. But those that had the handler didn't have my fraternity ring on. Now I'm getting more and more desperate because I can see these beings, these soldiers, these nurses, these ward boys, these doctors, but I cannot contact them, and quite obviously they can neither hear nor see me. And finally, after what seemed to me an interminable amount of time, I went into this little room and saw this corpse lying in the bed. I gathered it was a corpse because the sheet had been pulled up over its head. And I didn't like what I saw, because when they pulled the sheet up over their head, they left this part of the lower arm, wrist, and hand. And on the finger was my 5-gram fraternal ring, one of the way of mixing it up. Because it was the 5-gram seal on black onyx in the University of Richmond State. And you don't have one made up like that very often. Not only that, the onyx was chipped, chipped. And what distressed me, the color of that hand had the exact same color that I'd seen my grandfather's hand have when he had expired 3 years before. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. You're dead. But you see, I wasn't prepared for this. I had been raised strict orthodox fundamental Baptist. The concept that when you died, you either went to heaven or went to hell. This wasn't heaven, and this certainly wasn't hell. I had vaguely heard about purgatory and paradise, and this didn't fit any of those cases either. To me, it was getting more hellish by the moment. There was one stage in my mental thinking that I thought if I could just see, I call her my mother, it was actually my stepmother, my brothers and my sisters, everything would be fine. See my dad again, I knew he was overseas where, I didn't know where. I'd give him that hope. The idea of getting to be the youngest doctor to graduate from the Medical College of Virginia in modern times, that had gone. Now just to see any human being that I could talk and communicate with. I'm sitting down on the side of the bed, and that puzzled me because I could walk through that bed as, I can't say as easy as I can walk through the wall, and because I can't do it anymore. But I could sit on the side of the bed. But I could not pick up the sheet to pull the sheet back so I could be sure of the face. And I don't like this. Somehow or another, I don't appreciate being in the room with a dead body. It was scaring me. And I thought, I've got to get out of here. Now, as I said, like the beds here, there's a white medical bedside table here, there's a stalk of this lamp, and there's a little 15-watt bulb. I'd be about where you are with your bulb here. Because I'm sitting there at the foot of the bed. And I first thought, well, that bulb is getting brighter. Now, what seemed to me in almost an instant, what started off as a little 15-watt bulb getting brighter, if I had turned on a million welder's lights, you'd have some idea of the intensity of light that was coming from the head end of that room. And I realized that what didn't have anything to do with the bulb. There was the most brilliant light I have ever seen right there at the head of the bed. I can well understand why Saul on the road to Damascus was blinded by what he was seeing, and I can tell you tonight, as a physician, the human retina could not stand this intensity of light. And I wasn't seeing it through any human retina. The human retina was over here in this body, and as far as I was concerned, was dead. Now, to give you some idea, if I want to call this to the thinking, I was still a thinking being, still a spiritual being. And I think this was the end from all for me. Argument I was later to find out that had been going on in medicine ever since 1650, what we call the mind-brain problem. Seeing them as the same thing. Oh, I'm quite convinced they're not the same thing. Now the next thing that happened, three things that quick, instantaneously all at the same time. Something deep inside of the spiritual being sitting on the side of the bed so loud within me, it sounded like it was all in the room. Stand up. You're in the presence of the Son of God. Not a Son of God, the Son of God. Was my Baptist because I had been a Baptist the first 11 years of my life. I thought up the last Alpine damnation in the Bible East Hannibal Presbytery. I had one up here. It's out of middle Virginia, and I didn't join a church at first. I had spread the world would come to an end before I could get back and join the second one. And join the second one. So to me, the Son of God was the risen Christ. At that exact same moment, the entire walls of that hospital disappeared, and every minute detail of my entire life, in my own cesarean section garment, my own mother's death 1 month later, every minute detail, everything I'd ever done in public, in private, in light, in darkness, was there in panoramic view. Now, the next thing that happened, out of this great light, stepped the most amazing being I have ever been in the presence of. If any of you have seen some of these young construction workers that are built like the proverbial bull around here in Charlotte, saw one the other day over at my Nautilus club. He pressed 350 pounds. This being, when he was in physical form, was better built than that young man. I could well understand if he was whom I understood he was, something I've never been able to understand before. Why, when on several occasions they had gotten mobs together ready to kill him, he could walk through the mob and no man would dare touch him. I'm not trying to paint him as a Superman, but I'm saying he's not the type of guy that you're going to pick a fight with any more than some of these really terrifically built guys are here, right? None of you got good sense. I can understand why he could say, no man taketh my life unless I decide to lay it down. But young people, this is not the thing that impressed me the most about it. I have never been in the presence of such a being. Imagine a being that knows every minute detail of your life and totally accepts you and totally loves you. Now, how many of you here, because I'd like to ask you a question I've asked a lot of people as I've gone across the United States speaking. How many would you like for you here, like for your wives, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your best friends to know every single thing you've ever done? Hold up your hands. Would you believe I actually saw one hand go up in America? It belonged to the Episcopal priest right over here in Orange, and I don't think he fully comprehended what I was saying. Can you imagine, and try to imagine with me, the change in my mental attitude? A moment before his appearance, I was absolutely petrified. All hope, all of my dreams blown sky high. See, I really wasn't very old when this took place. I was only 20 years of age. I'd taken out my GI insurance somehow or another. I felt that was guaranteed free school attendance. I just barely had one school. Somebody was getting that wires crossed up on me. I was too young to die. But here, a minute before, I would have given anything to be able to get back in touch with any human being. Now I had never met anything in this whole plane of existence that we know as Earth that would cause me to want to leave this guy for one single second. To meet a guy that loves you this way, you don't want to leave him under any circumstance. I have never been in the presence of this being. And I made the most amazing discovery. The one person, according to Christian teaching, that was given the right to judge, doesn't. He's in the loving department. Isn't that amazing? I get so tired of these fundamental people that want to send everybody to hell. If they could only realize that he probably had less to say about the devil and hell than anybody that's ever lived in either Judaism or Christianity. And an awful lot to say about love. Now, the next thing that totally blew my mind was in a rather Socratic fashion, he asked me what had I done with my life. Now, quite honestly, he's not asking for information since he can see every minute detail. Now, young people, you talk about having a huge heartbeat skips at this stage. I'm a pretty normal. I wasn't St. George, you see, he was everlasting. There's some things that I'm hoping he wouldn't notice. And I'm still hedging. So when he asked me what had I done with my life, because here at True Mental Telepathy, let me say this is the next most important thing I learned. Hypocrisy is totally ruled out. You see, you can't think one thing and say another over because whatever you think, the other person becomes instantaneously aware of. At least with him, that's my understanding. So I thought, well, I was an Eagle Scout. That means I'm beginning to be an Eagle Scout or something. And in the sweetest, most kind, loving sort of way, immediately the thought back that glorified you. Again, what have you done with your life? So then I thought, well, I was president of my college fraternity. Well, he was too kind to let me see the truth. Quite a few boys had already been called into service before I was made president of my fraternity. And then he laid it over. Not in condemnation, but in a question that he wanted me to think about. What had I done with my life to show him? Put yourself in my shoes, man. He wasn't involved in some little petty thing because when I was 19 years of age, I went to one time when I had a regular philosophy. So the first I want to find out what it was like to get going. Man, I was really humble. Got my best friend, one of the assistant professors that was a friend of mine at the University of Richmond. The assistant security executive of Richmond. We all went down to the Boy Scout camp in the middle of winter with the express purpose of getting me drunk as a skunk so I could see what it was like. Hopefully with the attitude I wouldn't get that way anymore. But when I did that, I really don't know. You couldn't say anything about that. But he was asking me a far more important question. Was I capable of loving the people I had met on this plane of existence? My parents, my brothers, my sisters, my friends, my teachers, my ministers, the way he loved me. Now, I have never felt as totally inadequate in my life. I felt God like that because I was the most perfect being I've ever been in present. And the answer was quite obvious. No. It was perhaps then for the first time that I began to understand what he meant when he said, I'm the vine, you're the branch, without me you can't do anything. I don't believe this was just my keys. If I thought mine was the only keys like this, let me say this to you. I wouldn't be wasting your time here tonight to visit as y'all are here going for the end of this school term. But I realized, and this is one of the things that's been indelibly written across my mind, I don't have the capacity to love everyone. Occasionally, I have the capacity to get out of his way so he can love through me. Other than that, I don't have that capacity. Now, young people, by this time, you can begin to understand, and I think I have seen everything possible to see. I think I've experienced everything possible. This was just the beginning. The next thing I knew, this time we were both suddenly up and out of the hospital. Again, traveling at a terrific rate of speed. I don't know where this was. The only thing I can tell you, it was a large city beside a massive body of water. Whether it was along the Texas coast, whether it was Chicago, New York, Boston. I know it wasn't Norfolk because I'm fairly familiar with Norfolk. I know it wasn't there. Because when we came down, I could see this massive body of water in this city. If you've ever flown at night, when you come into a large city like Washington, someplace like that, you see the lights all over. As we're coming down, I began to get the idea that something's radically wrong with my vision. And don't ask me how I could see it, because we're not in human form. But I could certainly see. Because I could see all of the things you'd see, like if you're coming down into any large city at night, in the plains, you can see the buildings, the street lights, everything else. And apparently, we're going to land right smack dab in the middle of the downtown of this large city. But the closer I got, I could see this, looked like another whole dimension going cattle by a sword. When we looked down on the street, we looked in front of a bar. I could see the soldiers, the sailors, the civilians in the bar, but I could see all these other beings in the bar. Now the thing that distinguished them was this. You and I, human beings, have an electrical field, or what some people refer to as an aura around us. These other beings didn't. Now make no mistake about this. I'm not a member of the WCTU. I'm like my wonderful old Presbyterian minister. The newest perfect, beautiful, and the gospel is very heinous on the downward table. There's a time and place for everything. I enjoy a drink as well as anybody else, but under the proper circumstances. But I was to learn something, and let me say at this stage, to turn the point. In the next 3 realms that I'm going to tell you that he took me through, because he took me through 4 different realms of life. 3 of these realms, we could see the beings they could not see us. In this particular realm I'm telling you about now. Because quite obviously I'm seeing the human realm, but superimposed on top of it, there is this other realm with these other beings. When the human beings would get drunk enough, I'm not talking about those just having a drink, I'm talking about those who got intoxicated to the point of passing totally out, one of these other beings would come rushing toward them and disappear inside. And during this whole stage, he wasn't trying to explain anything, he was just letting me observe. Now, one thing I want to say, this raises far more questions than it begins to answer. The next thing, we're going down again into the industrial part of this city. In 1943, most of our factories were on 24-hour round-the-clock, 8-hour shifts. I could see the human being standing there beside the assembly lines working. I could see the foreman, I could see the officials. I could see these other beings standing right there beside them, still trying to tell them how to run their business. But you see, they couldn't see them any better than the ward boy had been able to see me or that man in Vicksburg. I started to see another section. So we've kind of now moved out into what the suburb would be. Saw this, I've forgotten whether he was a sailor or a soldier walking down the street, but walking right beside him was this other being. I think when she'd been in uniform, was probably been his mother. She was still trying to tell him what to do, how he should keep his shoes shined and everything, but he could neither hear her nor see her. Then suddenly, for some way that I can't begin to comprehend, to get across to you in words, we're in this realm separating from the human component. Then what I began to see became even more confusing and complex. I could see a lot of young people like myself and older people, because the people that were crossing over this thing that we call death was massive at this stage. After all, we did have a world war. And I could see these beings lying there on the floor in a self-induced hypnotic state out of their belief. And what you would consider angels were trying to wake them up and helping them to realize they didn't have to sleep around somewhere until the evil came along tooting on the horn. Read your Bible, ladies and gentlemen, very carefully. God is a God of the living in all realms. And if you don't lay around here sleeping all the time, you certainly can't get very well through the Darden School of Business if you sleep all the time. You're certainly not going to get learning some of the terrific things that you have to learn if you stay in a self-induced hypnotic state. I saw something that probably caused me later to go into psychiatry, because I was a family physician for 13 years before I specialized in psychiatry. Every 2 minutes tonight while I'm speaking, somebody will successfully commit suicide. Now, there are many different types of suicide, and I want to make this clear. I'm not talking about the type of suicide that comes about because a person is totally psychotic and no longer understands what they're doing, such as in schizophrenia, psychotic depression. The type of interminable, intractable illness that the pain is too severe to any longer stand. But I'm talking about the type of suicide that Dr. Klaus Thomas did research on in 1947 in Berlin, right at the time that the Berlin survival was going on, because there were an awful lot of people that were committing suicide. The type of suicide that people commit because they're so angry that instead of killing you, they'll kill themselves to get even with you. And what Dr. Klaus Thomas found was true. In Catholic societies where you have the largest to do against suicide, you have the countries you have the greatest homicide rate. In Protestant societies where you have the greatest to do against homicide, you have the greatest suicide rate. So there's a very definite correlation. Now, I saw what happened to people when they get on the other side. They're absolutely locked into seeing what that has done to the people that love them the most until they change their minds. Now, so you don't think this is a lone affair, let me say this. George Gallup in 1982 wrote a book on this thing because it seems that when I've often been called the godfather of the near-death experience. I'm the one who called Ray Moody, but Ray Moody was a third-year undergrad student here at the university when I was in my third-year residency. That's where we met. You heard me tell this to a bunch of high school and college students back here in 1966. What Ray has found, Dr. Mike Sabon at the University of Florida, Dr. Kenneth Ring in Connecticut, George Gallup, 8 million cases in the United States today of near-death experiences. Of that 8 million, approximately 5% have been in-depth near-death experiences like my own. Of these 5% in-depth near-death experiences, of those who attempted suicide, we don't have one single case of anybody make a second attempt. Whereas those that attempted suicide and did not have a near-death experience, better than 30% successfully make a second attempt and die. So this ought to tell you something. Just out of that alone. Now, by this time, I'm thinking that I have seen everything, not so much. Suddenly, again, we're traveling, and this time we're into a different realm. Everything I've done to you so far is waiting on the surface of this planet. Well, you can't see it because well, you want to set different molecular structure, speed, molecules, whatever else you want to say. This time, a lot of people have asked me if I'd be interested in astral projection, astral travel. What I was now to see so completely horrified me that I would never want to be in this realm with this being. As well as understanding that. I have never been in a realm that I saw such a bigot than this one. Such know-it-allness. Such religious people standing there and plunging each other to death, trying to prove that their reality was right and everybody else's was wrong. Such lewd acts committed. No, I didn't see any lake of fire and brimstone. I didn't see the childish concept of taking a literalistic interpretation of what's in our Bible. I saw something far worse. This was a realm totally devoid of beings that any longer had the capacity to love. Get horrified. I would no more want to be caught in a place like that without the Christ that to protect me than think of jumping into a thrashing machine. And even there, a God who loves you and me was doing everything he could to try to get these people to change their mind, but their minds were set in concrete. I can well understand why he told the story of my fathers. He would call Abraham and live the blind beggar. The gap is too wide. Apparently couldn't be breached. Now, if that was utterly devastating, I have no desire to dwell on this because I found it from a long time ago as a human being and as a psychiatrist. You don't scare people into heaven. You love them into heaven. You fight them into hell. But the next realm, if that was horrible, the next realm he was to show me was one of the most stimulating and exciting things. And as you heard Mr. Bond says, the next realms were to remove any fear I ever had of any death. Got good news for you. God's a Scotsman. He doesn't waste anything. Now, young people, when this thing happened to me, I had majored in chemistry, minored in biology and physics, in pre-medicine, and thought I knew something. This time, I, for lack of a better term, call it the dental realm. It was just one massive center of higher learning after another. It was in this realm that I was to hear music that we don't even have instruments on this realm of development yet to bring some of the marvelous sound that they were playing some of the music through. Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Handel would have been right at home. I hate to say I did not hear any rock and roll. Now that should be a factor, but there's some of the men that will blow him up. I went into a center of research, like if you came over here, and I guess went into the physics department of the chemistry department at the University of Virginia. Dr. Robert Natal, who now chairman of your solid state physics here, is a very close personal friend of mine. It'd be like me going into his laboratory, or better still, have my 6-year-old son when he was 6 years of age, went to the college laboratory, and try to comprehend what he was saying. I couldn't even comprehend the instruments these beings were working with. 10 years later, I picked up the centerfold of Life magazine, and I felt the hair go right smack up the back of my neck. Because in this centerfold picture of Life magazine, this I said 10 years, it was around 1952 or 53, I'm not sure which, there was a picture of our first atomic power plant, and one of the instruments in that picture was one that I saw these beings working on in 1943. Now I can tell you tonight, as a fairly high trained physician and psychiatrist, we can map, as Dr. Penfield did up at McGill University, every section of the brain, your emotional centers, what everything does. But there are two things we cannot account for in the human brain. We cannot account for where new ideas come from, and we cannot find your decision-making process. That simply is not an instrument of your brain. But if I ever had any doubt as to where new ideas possibly coming from, I think it's this realm. And don't ask me whether it's up or down or sideways, I have no idea. The only thing I can tell you is the proximity of this planet is extremely close. I was to realize out of some of these things I was seeing here that there's nothing that is good that you can get interested in this realm, that if you continue to be interested in studying and research, you can't learn more about if you go to this realm. And apparently this is one of the things that causes you, when you pass this thing we call death, to go to this realm, is your love of study, research, and things of that nature. Now, let me get you a background again of my religious history. Raised strict Orthodox Southern Baptist. As I said, when I was 11 years of age, went up to visit some friends in the country, got caught in the last Hellfire damnation of the Darden, the Presbyterian, and fortunately came back under one of the most lovable men I've ever known, Dr. John McLean, who was over at Union Theological Seminary and the minister of the Unborn Presbyterian Church. Had a chance to be under him from the time I was 11 until I went into service in 19 years of age. Now, at that day and stage, tragically enough, I had the idea that if you were Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, you were on fairly solid rock. You're Episcopalian, you're getting a little on slippery ground. If you were Catholic, you were beyond redemption. If you were Jewish, you were without the Antichrist. If you were Buddhist or Hindu or any of the other things, you were gone. In taking me into this one sort of higher learning, Jesus was to remove every bit of that prejudice from me. He took me into a library that if any of you have ever been to downtown Richmond, if you put every single building in downtown Richmond together under one roof, it was bigger than, the library was bigger than that. Ladies and gentlemen, it housed the holy books of the universe. You could put all the holy books of this planet, the Bhagavad Gita, the Torah, the Book of Islam, the Bible, every single book in one little room in this library. Now, I was giving this talk to a bunch of faculty members at this university back here, I guess about 15 years ago. And I'll never forget Dr. Robert Burns, who now I understand is probably either head of Greenbank, West Virginia, or assistant head. Came up to me after it was over, and he said, Dr. Ritchie, why were you surprised by that? Well, you got to remember, I was 20 years of age, and nothing hadn't gone on. And I not only thought that the center of the universe was the planet Earth, but the center of the planet Earth was the United States. And probably the center of the United States was in the south. God, I did that get wrong piece. Dr. Burns said, I want to tell you something. He said, do you have any idea how many estimated planets there are that we feel are equal to Earth in development, if not superior? I said, no, what? He says, 13 million. I said, what do you base it on? He said, as you know, each star out there probably has a series of planets rotating just like we do in us. He said the most conservative number of suns in the universe right now, as we know in radio astronomy, is over 13 million. And if each one of those stars just has one planet with intelligent life, that's where I would get that number. I can assure you from my own subjective experience, we are just a tiny little golf ball sized planet in this universe, and far from being the most advanced. Now by this time you can well imagine I think I have seen everything. Because what this Prince of Love was showing me, no longer if you're going to be a follower of his for any prejudice for race, creed, color, or religion. He said, I, and if I be lifted up, will draw all. Didn't say anything about what denomination, what religion we use. What does it mean to lift him up? If we truly learn to love the way he loved us, this would happen. And then we'll have a universe instead of a Darden. And by this time, I think I have seen everything. No. This time we're leaving the vicinity of this planet completely. This time we're going right into space. And we're heading, I don't know how to describe this. Again, words are totally ineffable. I simply can't put it into words. The only thing I can tell you, that after a period of time, we got to a place, and it's not on a planet. It is a place, it is a collection of beings in an extremely far advanced culture. Because the beings in this place were growing in appearance like unto Christ himself. Now, I'm not talking about in individual looks. I'm talking about in the light they emit, in the love they radiate. Now, as I thought we were going right in, but he stopped. Two of these beings came into meet. Now, this was one time there was some communication I could not comprehend. And the next thing I realized, we were heading back. The next thing I know, we're right back into this hospital room in Darden, Texas. And ladies and gentlemen, when we come to the question and answer period, I'll be glad to answer any questions up to what I'm saying. At this stage, I have not been given permission to answer in any more detail than what I'm getting ready to tell you. He did it almost like he was doing something I can't begin to comprehend, but opening a card of time so I could look down the future. And he let me see what this planet could become like if we truly learned what was his purpose in coming and what we're supposed to do. And if you go back and read the scriptures very carefully, it's clear as the nose on your face. He didn't come down here to die. He did realize, because he had 100% ESP, if he came down here and got mixed up with this insanity we're all infected with, that we'd probably kill him. But the most misunderstood thing about Christianity as a taught was that he came down here to die. Show me where it says that. That he himself said. Darden. God so loved the world, he sent his Son into the world, that whosoever believeth in him should not die, but have everlasting life. What does it mean to believe? To follow his teachings. What was his teachings? Ultimate total surrender of the ego. St. Freud called the ego to him. For he says, I speak not for myself, I have no will but to do the will of my Father. Because he could say that, he had created down here, and he proved that we could be in a universe with God himself. Man by his own nature is we're created in the image of God, we all created. But with everything we create darkness. We split everything into we and they. Republicans and Democrats. Conservatives and liberals. The university and the University of Richmond. Right? That's not God's way. Stop to think what he taught us. The moment I say our Father, I become brother and sister with any one of you here. He let me see what we would become like if we truly began to become one with him as he had become one with our Father. And we can go into religion. And that's their wish. He then, like he opened up another part up, let me see what happened to this planet, and we continue our own narcissistic self-centered. And I can tell you, in your wildest imagination, you can't comprehend the destruction we can bring upon ourselves, and will bring if we don't change. But let me say this is not God's will. He is always God of love and wants us to learn to love. But we have got to stop putting things into we and they, into darkness, into thinking we know more than anybody else. We've got to come to realize that not one of us see the truth, because all of us have separate realities. You've got to realize that the only truth and the only true love you now can ever really find is within. And we, like that old college man once said, you can't give it something you ain't got no more than you can come back and bring you into it. And then he closed it off. And I can't tell you the details about that, because one thing he quickly let me know, when he did give me found permission to start speaking of this, is that my job is not here to try spiritual, but to try and get you to learn to true love. Let's take about a little break, and if anybody has a question, you can ask.
We've got some refreshments. We'll pass them around, and then maybe some question and answer. Dr. Ritchie's got to leave pretty soon, by about 10 o'clock. So we'll just take the question and answer time now, and the refreshments after. If you have to leave, feel free to go.
One thing I want to preface before we start the question, that's I hope you understand. Psychiatrists are an embassy of low number.